Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Pull Up with Limbs and Things. My name is Dr. Chanel James. I'm the owner of Limbs and Things Mobile and Telehealth Physical Therapy. And tonight, you're watching Pull Up with Limbs and Things, and we're talking about navigating death. We're going to have a moment of silence just for anyone that we know who has passed away in 2025. So let's have that moment of silence now. Thank you. All right. So this is a heavy topic. A lot of us tend to not want to talk about death and not talk about end of life anything. But tonight we want to think of it as a little pre loss in talking about what we should look at before someone passes away. And we have tonight Miss Alison Butler. She's also a PhD. She doesn't want to be called Dr. Allison, but she does have that credential. I met Allison at a networking event in DC earlier this year, and I'm usually the introvert, have to warm myself up to get to talking to someone, but I found my person at that event, and it was Allison. And we ended up having a discussion about what her practice is, what mine is as well, and how we intertwine. But it was very interesting to me about how we navigate death and having someone who considers themselves a death doula. We often hear about people who have doulas when birth occurs, but we possibly need someone also when death occurs as well. And so tonight, Allison, it's good to have you. Share a little bit about who you are, what your company is about, and then we'll get into navigating death.
My name's Alison Butler. I trained as an end-of-life doula, my first training in 2021, as I was taking care of my father who was dying. I've done subsequent trainings. And, being around end of life and thinking about end of life and thinking about intentionality towards end of life is something that I was exposed to early growing up in San Francisco in the late 70s, early 80s during the AIDS crisis, when suffering was not just viewed as a virtue, the language about fighting disease and, it's like, and giving up, that language just drives me crazy. Because it doesn't take into account quality of life at all. And so I think that's why this world sort of spoke to me is that I felt like I could bring a different perspective to help people sort of think about things that people don't like to talk about.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of a family tradition. We tend to be the people that talk about things that people don't like to talk about.
Yes.
There are a couple of different things. I mean, end of life doula, I don't love death doula only because it puts the emphasis on the death part.
Yeah.
And for some doulas, that really fits. They really want to come in towards the end and be with them as the person transitions. Some help with grief and, funerals and so forth. And for me, I like to come in early enough so that as you get closer to the dying death part, it's in a way that you wanted to the extent you have control. And the only way to do that is to make sure people have their advance directives done and that they've had conversations with people about what it is they do and do not want. And the only way that happens is through education.
True.
And so it's now doctors are required to ask if you have an advance directive, but it's not as though they have time to help you if you don't.
True.
And so, I don't know if you say I don't, like maybe they hand you a form and say fill it out. And some of the forms are not very friendly. Like they're not easy if you're not used to talking about these kinds of things.
Absolutely. So if you're watching us and you have a comment or a question, you can always put it in the chat. Pull Up with Limbs and Things is to confirm something you know, to challenge something you don't know, and to give you the information to share it with someone else. So we hope that this information gives you a little more empowering as we navigate this aspect of life that we may have to cross with ourselves or with someone we know close to us.
Well, we all will have to cross.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's the thing. There's a lot of different things I could talk about. I think that, April 16th is what's called National Decision Day, and it's to get people to fill out their advance directive. And so I kind of wanted to start land there. And I recently got a call from the wife of someone I've worked with, and the family, it's crisis after crisis. And once you hit the crisis after crisis period, it's very hard to step back and think, oh, what do I want? Or your kids are like flying in and out, they didn't live near, and, the father didn't have an advance directive. His wishes were never conveyed to anybody that might be making their decisions. The wife no longer is capable. Mm-hmm. So, it's the earlier people can get to this, the better off everybody is. Because if you don't have a advance directive and you're in the hospital, if your body starts to die, they are required to do everything possible to keep you alive.
Right.
Every intervention, intubation, and so if that's what you want, you still want that to be your choice.
Absolutely.
So what is an advance directive? Let's start there. So one is it's multi-part. The most important, or one of the most important, is who makes decisions for you if you're not able to make them for yourself. And usually that person can sort of speak to doctors ahead of time, like during an illness, even when you could still speak for yourself, but maybe you're not as aware. So like with my dad, I was able to talk to his doctors and so forth, even though he was coherent. And so it's the person that you trust to make the decision that you want to have them make.
Got it. So who does this form for you? Or who should you take this form done?
The way, I spent a lot of time trying to see if there were a lot of support for doing that in this area, and I couldn't find very much. So some end-of-life doulas do it. Lawyers do it. I advise against lawyers, nothing against lawyers. They have their bailiwick. Like, I don't know anything about wills and trusts, but they don't know anything about medical care. I mean, about medical stages of like what kinds of interventions you want. And so to me, doing advanced directives is about a conversation that has to really think about and look at what's important to you. What's your quality of life? What defines your quality of life? Is it that you can, get up and ambulate? Is it that people can still come and see you and you can hear them? And it's different for everybody. But often it's like their spouse is checked as their medical power of attorney, but there's been no conversation.
Right.
Somehow they just know, except they never do. And one thing that I want to stress is that, because I've heard people say, well, I don't want to give them more tell them what to do. But it's a gift to the people taking care of you because they don't know. And so they're agonizing trying to think about what you would want if you were able to speak for yourself. And that's an added stress. And they may get it right, they may not.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. So advanced directive, we need to get that possibly from someone like yourself.
Yes. So that's one of the things that I do. There's more parts. So the other part of the advanced directive is about life-sustaining treatment.
Mm-hmm.
So specifying what you want and don't want. And, one of the articles I fantasize writing about that I never seem to have time is about medical shows and how they portray CPR.
Yeah.
People, you could probably speak to that even better than I could. But wanting CPR when you're frail and older, it's just always bad. It doesn't turn out well. The success rate is tiny. So,
what's the show you told me you thought did the best depiction?
Say again?
What's the TV show you told me you thought? The Pit. Yeah.
The Pit. They did. It was a 4-episode arc. And it allowed them to show when, even though the guy didn't want to be intubated, one of the kids did and had medical power of attorney. So you sort of saw what that meant. And so you actually saw the whole range and all the conversations were had. Mm-hmm. I've never seen that before. And I don't think there's a medical show I've missed.
Okay, I got to check out The Pit because I like medical shows too. but I haven't seen that one yet. Okay, I will definitely look at that. Okay, so tell us the difference between the advance directive and having the medical proxy. And could that be one and the same? Because people tend to think just having the medical proxy is enough. Not, you don't need also the advance directive.
Well, medical proxy is part of an advance directive. So an advance directive can also, though, include your views on life-sustaining treatment. You can limit what your medical proxy can and cannot make decisions about. Some states, the advance directive includes a mental health power of attorney, so that you have someone, if there's a history where you have a person who's deciding, not the state or a doctor. And so in Arizona, where I used to live, they have it. And in some of the sites I mentioned to you that you'll show people, they have those forms. There's a DNR might also be part of your, that's a do not resuscitate.
Right.
And for that, it's both that and some of the life-limiting treatments, you need a doctor's signature.
Okay.
The rest of it is gone. So it's certainly, you're not required to have somebody. They're hard conversations. And first you have to figure out what you want for yourself, but then you have to share it with your loved ones about what it is you want, and they may not want what you want. If you believe in medical aid in dying, you can't have a medical power of attorney who doesn't, because they can just say no.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about how you start the conversation with possibly a family member or a friend who needs these things in place, but may not be ready for the conversation.
Usually, though, I don't see those people. I've done some workshops. I think it's, I would ask, why aren't you ready? What is it about the conversation that makes you uncomfortable? Right? Do you have experiences that were bad, that make you nervous? Do you what is it that makes you uncomfortable? Because it's the reality that it's going to happen to everybody. And this is a way to sort of have more ownership. And I think some people don't want that ownership. I think some people are happy. I mean, my father was just, you decide. He didn't want anything to do with any of his decisions.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, there are people who want to be able to be as in control as possible. And the only way to do that is to specify things in greater detail. And so some sites like My Directives, which is actually what the state of Maryland uses, has a much more expansive, and it's what I used for myself even before I moved out here, expansive set of questions to help you just think about what quality of life might mean to you.
Mm-hmm.
There's an organization called the Conversation Project, and they have prompts and starters of how to start the conversation. Whether it's with your medical professional, whether it's with the person helping you fill it out, whether it's with a loved one, right? So, there's been a big expansion of resources for this, because the cost of not having one is people ending up on, life-sustaining treatment for a very long period of time, which is also very expensive. So sort of from a systems point of view, in the coldest way, sorry. I'm sorry, I've been an economist in my former life. It benefits everybody for people to have it, but it benefits, honestly, Medicare, right?
Yeah.
And health insurance. So they have an incentive to help people do this.
Gotcha. You have a question. Let's see. Hi, Gloria. It says, hello, I knew about birth doulas, but never knew about death doulas. How do people find out about you? And how are you different from hospice care?
It's a good question. I get it a lot. Hospice care is they have a nurse and a social worker. Maybe you get a volunteer, a chaplain. What we do is sort of ancillary to what they do. Ideally, we work with hospice. That's usually what I've been able to do. So we're another pair of eyes. We can be there when they're not there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're also trained to recognize signs of a person's system shutting down, or, you know, we tend to notice things that maybe family don't. We can give family a break. Maybe you want to have conversations that you don't want to have with your family, or you want help having conversations with your family. We can do those things as well. So, you know, there's several different training programs. There's an organization called the National Alliance of End of Life, the National End of Life Doula Alliance. So it's like NEDA with Alliance at the last one.org, I think. And they have different ones by name. I think there's a website now, Death Lab TMP. I'll have to double check that. That has a listing of some doulas in the area. The one big difference is that insurance doesn't pay for us. And, you know, so, and also another advantage also is if there's nobody in the area, again, then we're a regular person to help. Mm-hmm. And then we can talk to, like, I have a portal where I can put notes for family that are long distance, so they can follow along with each visit, you know, without having to talk to yet another person. Yeah. So those kinds of things. So we're all private pay, and that's a problem. But right now there are no national standards. There's no, you know, if you think about where birth doulas were 20 years ago, that's kind of where we are.
Got it. Okay, and this is how we get in touch with you.
Say again?
This is how we get in touch with you.
Yeah. And so, I'm also happy to, you know, I always tell people, when you meet a doula, make sure it's the right fit for you. If it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. You know, I'm not the right doula for everybody. Yeah, and there have been some I've handed off to other people because it wasn't a good fit.
Got it. So I know when we talked before, you were saying when you like to get someone to be your client, what's a good opportunity in the scheme of life or the span of life to seek your services?
So, I mean, the advanced care directives at every stage of life. I mean, I can't tell many young people are like, oh, I won't need that yet. And it's like, yeah, well, you know, things happen.
You know, right.
You know, and they should be revisited pretty, you know, every major life event or every 5 to 10 years. But when it comes to someone like with a chronic illness or a terminal illness, I like to come on very early. So when you get diagnosed and you're deciding about treatment, so it may be something you might be cured and have treatment. There's a million decisions and there's a million people talking at you. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it helps to have someone to just sort of help you navigate that process. And, you know, maybe not be seen all that often, but just to help you, like, what is it you want? Because I so often see people, the doctor said to do this, and I don't want to die, so I'll try this, and then I'll try this, and then I'll try this. And now I've had no quality of life, and it didn't work anyway. Right? And so it's the time to space to think about things that you rarely have when you're sick. Mm-hmm. Because there's so many things to do, right? And everybody's trying to do things and schedule things and so forth.
Yeah.
And I do legacy projects, and that's also like to come on earlier where people do, you know, I've had someone who collected art just tell the story of her art on video for family who would be handed down the art.
Yeah.
You know, a life history with another person. So, you know, those kinds of things. And I always say it doesn't matter if you have family to give it to. There's lots of community organizations and religious organizations and regional organizations that would love to have your stories. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. We've got a couple of comments here. What are your fees for your services?
So, you know, my view is I take what people, let me start again. My retail fee is $100 an hour. And it's $100 an hour because there are people who can afford to pay that. And it allows me to take on people who can't pay that. And so if people can't pay that, then I'm happy to work with people, you know, if I'm able. And so I don't want to only have clients who can afford to pay the retail price. That's part of why it's set where it is.
Yeah.
So my fees are adjustable based on need.
Got it.
And people's feet range all over.
That's true. Brandon also says, would you say you are the first ever death doula?
No, it's a long history. What death doulas do is what used to be done by local communities.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you think about people died at home, the body stayed in the home for several days, people came, cared for the body, sat with them as they were dying. Like all of that was done in community.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes back probably thousands of years. We're in a more atomized world where family can't just do that, or you may not have family. Like people live scattered all over the country or all over the world. And so what's happened is we now have to bring people in to serve roles that were, historically served by more local community people.
Good. Hi, Ms. Hall says, how do you prepare the family for end of life?
It's a conversation. I think that, some families, usually the dying person is ready before the family, not always.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing is sort of to prepare them as early as possible, right? The signs of dying start to show up months in advance. And so, if it's not where it went to a crisis and they're dying quickly, and that happens. But I was just more if you're on hospice, to help prepare them for what to expect and what's coming. And do they want to have conversations? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Do they want help having conversations or facilitating conversations? Are there people who want to show up or not show up?
Mm-hmm. I think this is an interesting comment because there are a lot of times that family is not the one that the person wants to talk to. I find a lot of my patients talk to me about their dying wishes and some of the things that they are interested in having done. And I'm like, oh, where did this conversation come from? Or, they like to just get more personal with someone who is not close, just because they don't want the emotions to arise with their family members. So sometimes I think it's cool.
That's part of why a doula can be really helpful.
Right. And it may be helpful to have an extra person with the family there. And maybe the family's possibly in another room, but you're hearing what's going on because the person is not exactly comfortable to share it directly with you. Okay, we got a couple of comments here. Hi, Ms. Landon says, do you give complimentary consultations for people to learn more in depth about your services? And how can you best help them with their particular circumstances?
That's a really good question. Yes, I do. And almost every doula does.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm happy to meet with anybody, and preferably in person. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way, to just see what their needs are and see if I'm a fit.
Great. Okay. And then Ms. Dory says, thanks for your answer. I cannot imagine that this is an easy job. No one wants to think about death, even though it is inevitable. Sometimes it happens at the most inopportune time. I think that continues, should talk more about more to people and get the word out about your services.
I'm trying. It's hard to figure out the best ways to do that.
Yeah.
But this is one of the ways I'm doing that.
Exactly.
People will say to me, "God, that seems so depressing." And I think my view is that if I make someone's death easier for that person or for their loved ones, that's a blessing. And because everybody's gonna die. And so I think, for me, it's not depressing. I mean, it can be draining, but what I'm there to do is make the inevitable better.
I like that. Ms. Hall says, how did you get started?
Good question. I mean, I was someone who was always volunteering around sick people. And I volunteered for a couple of years on the oncology ward at a children's hospital. I had a friend's dad who I was super close to, was dying, and I ended up going down and sitting vigil with him and really being grateful for the experience. And then I learned more as I was taking care of my dad, and someone suggested I look into it. It just seemed like a fit. And there's lots of different schools and training programs. Again, not much standardization,
Mm-hmm.
but it's extremely rewarding. I had a different career, was not able to continue for health reasons, and this has been a really nice way to sort of feel useful and be helping.
Good. Okay, so I have a question. In our scope of practice, we have a lot of people who pass away. I had a patient that passed away last week, and it is heavy on the providers that are assisting them as well. How do you navigate that part?
I've actually been in conversation with several senior living communities about providing, having them sort of reserve a certain number of hours for their workers to contact. And I'm supposed to eventually do an in-service at a new senior living community about working with people at the end of life.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's a concern I have, which is why I sort of talk to companies, is that often, especially care workers, right? They get no support when a patient dies.
Nope.
And so, that's something that I have been sort of trying to push that they offer. Again, if you have to convince them it's in their economic best interest to do it.
Yeah.
And I think it's why there's so much burnout in caregivers. They don't have anywhere to go to let off the sadness or frustration or whatever it is.
Right. There's no off switch. Just keep going. Okay. Brandon says, have you ever rejected someone for services? And if so, can you discuss what happened?
So yes. One of the trickiest situations that I found is when you have different. This was a case where there were two different parties. One, the client. So one of the things is clarifying who's your client. Is your client the person dying, or is your client supporting the person hiring you?
Yeah.
And it was not something that was clear to me when I started working.
Okay.
And so I was hired by someone who was taking care of the finances for somebody who was sick and very challenging to work with. She had very bad environmental allergies and lived very remotely. And what became clear is that the person who was paying me wanted me to say and do things that was not what the dying person wanted. My person changed in her mind about whether she wanted help or not. I don't have a problem with that. That's what people do.
Mm-hmm.
And she was just ready to be done with all of it. And so I just said, this is not a position I want to be in.
Yeah.
So I quickly.
Okay, Ms. Hall says, do you incorporate any religious rituals with your services?
So yes, and it's the religious rituals of whoever I'm working.
Mm-hmm.
So when I worked with Jewish clients, there are Jewish rituals if they want them, and some have and some don't.
Right.
So as long as the religious beliefs don't go against mine, which is not easy to do. Yes, I think if they're a comfort to people, then they should be included. It's never the first and most important lesson I learned as a doula is it's never about me. Right? If they reject me, they've had enough. They don't want me anymore, which has happened. And I was like, well, wait, we were close. We were connected. And it's like, oh, no, it's not about me. Right?
Yeah.
And so, it's the same if, someone wants, whatever kind of religious ritual, I'm happy to learn it and adapt it or work with whatever that is.
Mm-hmm. So there are often times that we need resources in order to push the conversation, but also to make it a little bit easier for people to navigate. So you have a couple of them. You talked about the Conversation Project and My Directives. You want to talk about this one?
So caringinfo.org is a national organization that has resources for advanced directives, and they have it for every state. So because Virginia is different than DC is different than Maryland, although they all honor each other. And so that's another place where they also have information about how to think about filling those out. And with my directives, the drawback with my directives is it's all online. And so that's a barrier for some people.
Yeah.
If it's not a barrier, they ask you questions about, what environment do you want to be in as you're dying, right? People don't think about that. Like they tend to put the person where was the easiest access. Like my friend was just kind of in the living room because it was easier for everybody. But, I'm not sure that's exactly where he would have wanted to be. And, do you want certain music? Do you want smells? Do you want people you don't want? And so there's a lot of different ways to sort of, again, create agency for people. So, for me, I want my cats, I want baseball music and baseball announcers in the background, and I want all the windows open because I'm not going to get sick. I'm not going to catch a cold, no matter how sick I am, with the windows open. You have a backyard, maybe you just want to be in your backyard. Like there's no, once the body starts to die, the part doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And so, it's to help you think about all of the different ways you can, think about what might be.
Got it. Did you talk about this one?
No, and it's from Maryland, and it has a bunch of resources. It has some of the ones I've listed, but there's some others. So, and most of these resources are available in English and Spanish. And there are resources working with underrepresented communities because there can be different issues like trusting the medical system. So that's another thing. If you come from a history where the medical system has not been trustworthy, the more you take control of that and specify, the easier it's going to be if and when you get sick.
Yeah.
You said, I want this, I don't want that. And lawyers don't know all of the questions they have, in my experience.
Mm-hmm. Now, a question for you. I'm just comparing birth doulas and death doulas. When people have their wishes, wishes being honored can be challenging in the medical system. So, in terms of how someone should promote their wishes being honored at the time that they need them honored, what's your suggestion?
And I should specify, we are non-medical.
Yes.
Okay, so we're not allowed to be giving medical advice or any of that. So one is having the person that you've appointed know what you want. I have in my wallet a card from my directives that if I'm in an accident, they scan a QR code and they get all my wishes.
Great.
And I think that one has something like that for Maryland. Although, again, if you use my directives, they haven't. You want to have it that everybody has copies. You have copies at home, at the doctor's office, at the hospital. Right? Every time you go, do they ask, do you have it? Do you have it? And then you say yes, but you don't have it with you. And then, right, that's, I'm in med, so there's no way to upload it, which makes no sense. So I have to print it all out and bring it in.
Okay.
But, again, the more same with if you have a DNR, you'll have a wallet card saying, do not resuscitate me. So again, the more you've communicated to everybody, and hospice has no desire to violate anybody's wishes, right? That's not what they do. So it's, again, as long as they know what your wishes are, it's that they can manage them, they do.
Yeah. So I know we've been talking mostly about people who kind of have a little time before dying occurs or death occurs. What about those who are kind of in a season where they don't get that notification that death is occurring? What can you do, or what would you suggest is done for the person in that predicament? The family, per se.
So are you talking about when there's a sudden death?
Yes.
Okay. That really goes into the grief arena, which is not something I feel well enough trained to do. So if I've been working with them, I'll work with them a little bit, but then I would hand them off to other resources. And I didn't think to look for those resources, although I'm sure they exist all over the area. But I think it's important to pay attention to that and especially sudden deaths are so traumatic in so many different ways.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a place to go to talk about it and process it, it can create, some PTSD if there's a certain event, that reminds you of that moment. So, it's important to the extent you're comfortable to find somebody to talk to when that happens.
Got it. Okay. Well, I think this has been very helpful. I'm going to put the other links up, theconversationproject.org, caringinfo.org, mydirectives.com, and then nccelc.org as well. Thank you, Alison, so much for all the information you shared.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Please give us a final thought.
April 16th is National Decision Day. Try to at least fill out the most basic of forms so you're protected. And feel free to reach out if you have questions or would like to get together to talk about it. I'm also happy to come to a church group or a community group and help with that, get those conversations started.
That's great. We have one last comment. Miss Lynn says, do you have a network of other doulas who specialize in different areas you recommend to people?
A small one. I'm recently moved here. I do know other doulas, and it would kind of depend on the focus and what the needs were. But I'm always looking to have resources for people.
Absolutely. And this all says very interesting. Thank you. And so does Astoria. Okay. Well, I appreciate all that you shared tonight. I'm sure that someone has gained some information that they can share with someone else. Thank you so much. I hope that you all will use navigatingdying.com. I'm going to put her information back up so you can get in touch. Alison at navigatingdying.com. You can also reach her by phone at 771-242-5711 or navigatingdying.com. All right. And if ever you need physical therapy services, you can always contact LimbsNThings at LimbsNThings.com. Thank you all so much for joining us on Pull Up with LimbsNThings tonight. Happy April.
Thanks.
And we should remember April 16th is National Decision Day, right? Okay. Now, when we get the information, we just need to keep it with us and on us so that in the event we need it, we have it.
No, you need to make sure there's copies everywhere. Like the person who's your medical power of attorney needs to have a copy. Your doctor needs to have a copy. You're going to the hospital, they need to have a copy. You want a backup copy at home.
Okay, so put it in all those places.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Again, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night.